Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. I am going to be looking at one of my favorite albums from last year. It came in, I think, number 3 on my final top 20, and it had this unfortunate designation as one of those November albums. It comes out real close to the end of the year, and it was difficult for me to really pit it against things that I've been listening to all year. But Lowe's Double Negative really convinced me, drew me in heavily at the end of last year, and really put a pretty serious challenge up on those top 2 albums that I had. My relationship with Lowe is relatively short. I only discovered them, I guess, 3 years ago when Ones and Sixes came out, and my whole story about how I discovered that album is its own post. It's kind of a funny story. I can really only account for the leap between Ones and Sixes and Double Negative. And I can tell you the leap between those two is a huge, just quantum leap forward in terms of artistic vision of what the band was doing and what they're capable of. I consider it, in retrospect, sort of a mellow album. For the most part, it was, it was kind of a soothing album on the surface. But man, whenever you put in Double Negative, they straight off the bat pretty much knocked that one out of the dirt. Your idea that maybe this album is going to be another soothing one, you push play and all of a sudden, let's say that you bought your stereo from a guy who guaranteed that the stereo could reproduce any possible sound, and then some guy who is particularly crafty, some turtle, shows up and he gives you a CD. And the CD had the sound that was the sound that would destroy that stereo. That's what it would sound like. I mean, this whole album has this sort of sense that as you're listening to it, it's just going to make your speakers rupture and destroy themselves. But ultimately, that kind of distortion they have going on there, you have to wonder as you're listening to it, where is it coming from? What's the origin of that sound? If you watch videos of them playing their stuff live, they don't really have keyboards on stage. There's some washes, I think, if you listen very closely to some of the stuff going on in Double Negative. There is maybe some synthesizer work going on, but very generally speaking, I get the impression that Sparhawk is a pedal guy. Like he's got a big rig that's full of pedals that he uses to kind of coax these big environments out of his guitar sound. Now, he's not the kind of pedal pushing guy that, just kind of uses a guitar as a waveform generator and then he just kind of plays with the pedals, He's playing guitar, but clearly I think he's taking his guitar sound and has been exploring it like another person maybe would explore technique on their guitar. And it just gets bigger and bigger. And it looks like seems like to me, especially if you're listening to him as a guitar sound, his exploration of guitar sound is like pushed it to the limits of what a guitar can do with just pedals and acoustics. So what's interesting about Double Negative then, I think, is that the producer B.J. Burton is kind of almost taking on a role in the band in a way, because he's sort of meeting that guitar, the extremes of what Sparhawk is doing in guitar, and just kind of taking over and pushing it beyond what's possible in guitar. The distortion that you hear all over Double Negative is not guitar distortion. It doesn't sound like guitar. It's not like an overdriven guitar amp. It is like digital distortion, which is why it makes it sound like you're listening to it and you think that your stereo is gone on the fritz. It's the kind of distortion that can be that comes from overcompressed signal, and it's interesting because it's not acoustically possible in the real world. But Burton, as the producer, kind of took that on and he ran with it. So that sort of veil of distortion, that veil of kind of like pushing the limits of what's acoustically possible as the backdrop for the whole album. Now, as jarring as that first track is, it's like a declaration. They're saying up front, okay, this is going to be different than what we've seen before from us, from Low. And it's true. And once you kind of get over that hump of that first initial meeting with the opening track of this album, then you get kind of you're accustomed to how it's gonna play out. There's a lot of amazing, beautiful melodic work going on that just kind of like pushes at the edge of the distortion, pops out and comes back in, and then sometimes it will, the production will pull the distortion up to the edge of almost being pure noise, and then jerk it back, and then just reveal the song that's been there the whole time. It can be a jarring experience, but it's also really enthralling and invigorating. So that first track Quorum is they actually released that on video as kind of a 3-part triptych, as they're calling it. Quorum is the first of those, followed by Dancing in Blood and then Fly, those first 3 tracks in the album. And they do really flow one from the other extremely well. I would, they're not like movements or anything, but they seg from one to the other in a way that I think it's kind of telling they call it a triptych. It's sort of a reference to visual art. But in any case, you'll see that that announcement from the first track of that sort of overblown distortion bleeds over into the second track, Dancing in Blood. So, and you'll find, unfortunately, in this particular video that, if you've been enjoying watching me making little video clips of stuff for these videos, Low hasn't given me too much space to do that here, because almost, I guess, the majority of the songs on Double Negative actually have a video to accompany them. And most of the videos that are accompanying them are very compelling in and of themselves. This one is no exception. So check this one out. So it's kind of like what if Colonel Ty from Battlestar Galactica had an evil doppelganger in the Black Lodge who's kind of being a little bit pervy at some nightclub somewhere. It's what the vibe you get from it, straight out of like a David Lynch visual. But aside from that visual, which is in and of itself very compelling and very engaging, that you can hear how you've got this incredibly almost impossible to bear, distorted, thumping drum sound, and then beautiful, like washed out echoes that Mimi Parker's singing on top of that. And she's the drummer, so she's pounding out like this incredible, explosive pulse, but then is singing this beautiful melody on top of it. So that's the name of the game throughout this entire album. There's a constant sense that the music is pushing through this wash of, I keep on talking about distortion, but there's also like quite a bit of echo. There's like this gentle flange thing going on. Sometimes you'll hear like a doubled octaver voice where there's a kind of coarse auto tuning on it, so it gives this kind of jarring quality underneath. It really pulls out all the stops as far as effects go, but never to the detriment, never to the point where it actually covers up the song. it just gives the songs this amazing background upon which they're kind of painted on top of. Double Negative is it's a soft album, but that it's also oddly loud. No matter how quietly you play it, you feel like it can be an explosive experience, even though the juxtaposition is that the songs are actually all very low key and very mellow, and it fits in with Lowe's mission statement. They're kind of like, the name of the band is perfect. The band is called Lowe, and I really don't think that you can come up with a better descriptor than what this kind of almost sedate yet sinister feel that the band has, especially on Double Negative. So because it's that kind of album, like I very rarely have listened to it out loud with the family. It's not something you put on as background music, It's something you sit down and listen to. And it's kind of, in a way, maybe even a solitary album. I've ended up listening to it quite a bit on headphones, and I don't listen to music on headphones very often. I just don't have much opportunity to. But this album really called for it. More than once, I found myself really thinking that I need to sit down and really listen to everything that's happening at a volume that's not, that will allow me to appreciate everything, but not so loud that it's like, detrimental to my hearing. It's also because of an album this album that kind of needs to be listened to alone and like experienced and connected with emotionally. There's been a lot of critical acclaim on this album, and I feel like it's all extremely well deserved. Also, kind of like I'd mentioned with Astronoid, like I am fascinated by the amount of craft that went into creating this album. I don't think they just started like plugging things in just to see what would happen. I think that like it's very meticulously put together. I think that every little piece of feedback and distortion is intentional on the album. And when you perceive it that way and think of the way that they probably sculpted this album out of the sounds available and the potentials available, both by the instrumentation and by the studio, it's a pretty mind-boggling idea that this would be the result. So clearly, I can't suggest this album highly enough. I would really, even if you feel like you're put off by my sort of jarring introduction earlier, look past that. Look past the distortion. Look past the kind of grading qualities for it, because inside of that there's also the pull of something incredibly beautiful that I'm fascinated by. So Lowe's Double Negative is a very high recommendation for me. I would really suggest checking it out. I also have one little quick preview for you. I just kind of at the suggestion of some friends of mine over at Tacos and Turntables. It's another kind of pop culture podcast. They suggested I check out this album called Effluxion by Telekinesis. And it's kind of a cool power pop album. And I'm not really listening to a whole lot of that right now. Everything what I've been listening to recently has been pretty kind of deep and thoughtful. So it was pretty cool to check out. I was kind of on the fence about it until I found out the guy who's the lead singer is also their drummer. So that's always kind of points in my book. And it reminds me a lot of like the really great power pop I was listening to in the late 90s and kind of burned myself on at the time. But it's nice to hear it again, hearing somebody doing it well and with some conviction. I've got some new media portals online. I've got kind of a Facebook page up, and I've also put an Instagram up. So if you want to kind of keep up and either of those venues work for you, then please subscribe on whatever ones you want. Subscribe here at YouTube or through my blog itself. And I really hope to continue connecting with you guys. All right. So I appreciate it, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks.